Hello, everybody. Welcome back. It's been a couple nights since I've posted last. I did a September 11th broadcast. Told my story that I, went through in DC during the whole 9/11 incident 21 years ago the other day. It's September 15th now. Early AM. Coast to coast AM. That was one of my old favorite radio programs to listen to late at night when I was up or when I was traveling between Ohio and DC or vice versa, or here in Kentucky. So, I was just going back through my little survival podcast I did the other night. And it's such a wide topic, and I guess I should probably do sort of a series of podcast on that, on those topics. Because they're just super wide. So I should probably eventually break them down into the individual categories, I guess sort of in order, water, food, general equipment, firearms, stuff like that. And then communications, which was sort of the main topic of the one I did the other day, but communications, because it's so important. In whatever mode, there's a lot of different modes of communications. It doesn't have to be like radio, ham radio. It can be just, other general forms of communication, primitive forms of communication among people. It even goes back to very primitive forms. Like, if you're on a trail, or if you're, say the S hit the TF, having very primitive communications, like even in a physical format, would be important. Rock stacking, I remember from Boy Scouts having, you could do like danger signs, like two small sticks and one big one in the middle. So you would have like, get the camera here, like two small ones, and then say my head's like the tall. So, that's sort of like a danger sign, like there's danger up ahead or whatever, like a cliff or something. So even like analog human communications is important to know. And you have like the general Morse code, SOS, knowing that. So if you're, say in a situation where, say a disaster, like say Katrina, a hurricane, something along those lines. If you're in a situation like that, it's important to know. I'm sorry if my quality is not the best in the world. I'm still getting used to this new equipment that I've talked about in the last few podcasts. I think my audio is going to be better than it was the other night in that last survival video that I posted. But knowing like Morse code, for example, like I was saying, like if you're in a disaster thing and you're on the ground and say there's like, aircraft flying over, you want to be able to signal them. And sure, you can just like flash a light or, set a fire or something like that, or put something on the ground that's going to indicate where you are. But being able to know, communications, like Morse code, like analog communications, is valuable. With a flashlight, you can do the more, like I said, the SOS, the da 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 with a flashlight. If you have a radio, even if, like, say you have a handheld, like, FRS radio, like the ones, let me pull one up here, like one of these that you know, like, say your microphone's out, say you dropped it in the water and your mic doesn't work, you can click the button, on the side. The radio's off right now, but you can even, like, click, that, and then somebody who might be on that same frequency, would be able to know, okay, there's an SOS coming in. Let's, and if they were good rescuers or whatever, they might triangulate your signal and find out where you are and rescue you. So there's so many different ways to communicate, and it's good for people to know that. And probably if I do a series, that's going to be one big topic I get into. It's just all the different modes of communications that I've done myself. Like, you can interface, laptops with radios. You can interface. You can do, like, the handheld stuff I just talked about. You can do flashlights. You can do, if you have access to, like, a laser pointer. You can even shoot that, even though it's, like, not allowed during this day and age or whatever. If it was like a life and death situation in a sort of a apocalyptic type setting, you could, laze like an aircraft or a vehicle. Like, if you're, like, trapped in a certain area and you see, like, vehicles coming, you can shoot a laser and hopefully they'll see it and they'll, like, say, well, hey, WTF, who's shot in a laser at us? Let's go find them. And then they rescue you, or they might just, like, kill you or whatever. I don't know. But somebody's going to find you one way or the other. So there's that. Gosh. So many, like, topics and things going through my brain that I'd like to get into, but half the time these little podcasts that I do are sort of spur of the moment, inspired by a video I just watched on YouTube, or going back through some of mine and finding things that I should expand on. But like I said earlier in this podcast, I think I probably need to do some in the order, water, food, guns and ammo and general preparedness, communications, and then for longer term sustainability, hunting, foraging, scavenging, growing your own food, things like that. So, and I have a cohort here that I plan on. Well, we've been trying to plan it for a while, but either him or myself or whatever, we've been busy and things haven't lined up properly. But he's gotten bigger into the prepping type community, the firearms and the food growing and preparation, general preparation. A lot of the topics that I've already mentioned, he's not so much on the communication side, but that's between me and him. That's sort of my specialty. So, and he's looking to relocate from his location closer to where I am here, and then the rest of my network of people we can tap into. And I guess that's probably, if I'm going to discuss anything tonight, that's probably one of the main topics that I want to discuss. And a lot of preppers and survivalists are sort of the solo type. You do your own thing, maybe have a very close-knit community, which is good, but a lot of people, unless you've been into it for a while and you know a lot of people who are like-minded and similar, you're not going to have that from day one of a disaster scenario or an emergency scenario. You're not going to have that group, or even if you do, but say you're out of town, or You're not in like right around your local area, and something happens and you can't make it back. You're going to have to find a community of people to get into to survive. And you're going to have skills, to survive. For me personally, it's a lot of general information, general knowledge, um, on many different topics. But then my strong points are communications, um, and in many different modes. Whether it's radio or like everything I've talked about so far. So that's sort of my strong point, and then but having that knowledge, and you can have many different areas of knowledge. For example, a couple of the people that I've talked to on this topic here in my area, they're medical people, nurses, having the medical knowledge, and then to expand on that medical knowledge, if you have like natural homeopathic knowledge on those type of treatments, that's going to be valuable after some kind of situation comes down that where traditional pharmaceutical medicine is not available. You're going to have to know certain plants or certain chemicals or compounds or whatever can be gathered to treat certain ailments, whether it's an infection or how to treat water. If you can't boil it, for example, how to treat water with chemicals that are more naturally available. Things like that. And then there's just so many other. And getting into as robust of a community of people as possible, that's going to ensure longer term sustainability and survivability of a situation. So I guess the biggest advice overall that I'm trying to get across in this video is to now, while things are still normal, well, if you're watching this video, things are still normal, but have people talk to people. If they're not big believers in this, send them my video, send them scores of other videos that might be on YouTube from people who are worth watching on this topic. And there's a lot of them. Well, let me switch over to my browser here. DuckDuckGo. Let's see. I'm big on YouTube. Well, I'm not yet, but that's where most of the people I talk to. So there's the Not a Rubicon guy that I played the other night. Really good. You got like City Prepper. That's I haven't watched as much of the City Prepper videos, but they talk about a lot of things that are going to affect sort of the bigger cities, power supplies, food stores. It's of course, what they're saying are all valid things. I think they're probably a little bit more, for clicks and for views, they're probably being a little more sensational than they probably need to be, like at this point. But you never know when something's going to happen. But it just depends on what scenario they're talking about to know whether they're over sensationalizing it. But so I recommend some of these beginner how-tos, on different topics. Like there's solar setup, there's like power station stuff, food supply. They have like lots, just 15 items every prepper should hoard. Candles, medicine, I don't know, whatever. So there's just a lot of channels like that, and for I'm sort of honestly surprised how many people from so many different parts of my life, people that I'm around regularly, who have come around without me even necessarily having to influence them in any way. A lot of doctors, actually probably doctors more than any other, or former nurses or nurses. They're the ones who are most, I think, conscious of what's could be coming. Outside of outside of the typical prepper type, or people like me who used to work in the federal government and with FEMA, and who have been familiar with this for many, many, many years. Doctors and like nurses are probably the most conscious of this topic, because they sort of lived on the edge of the normal world, normality, but they also heard a lot of things from first responders and government people, and they, like, hot doctors and hospitals had to interface with the government and the federal government on disaster things like NIMS compliance and National Incident Management System, stuff like that. So even though it wasn't something that was probably in the forefront of their mind, it was something that they always thought about, or they have been thinking about for the last 15 plus years, since the sort of NIMS became something that the NIMS framework, which I don't think so big anymore. It's probably still around, and it's probably still somewhat of a training. There's like different levels of NIMS training for different parts of emergency management and so on. It's evolved. It's evolved, and I haven't been a part of it in over a decade, so I can't really speak on how it's evolved over that time. But me and the group I worked with, and then my boss back in the early 2000s, were the creators of the National Incident Management System after 9/11. When it was starting to be developed. The whole initial framework, because NIMS was sort of built around helping first responders communicate better in a emergency situation, because every department, well, not every department, but like, police, fire, EMT, federal, tribal, all the different agencies all have different codes, different, like, code 1, code 2, all the different codes. They have different 10 codes, even though some of them are similar, of course, like 10.4, 10.9, 10.7, 10.100. A lot of them are the same, but a lot of the codes in between weren't the same. And so, like, when 9/11 happened, there was a lot of different jurisdictions, a lot of different departments responding to the event, and their communications were confused. So part of NIMS was to, like, just use, plain speech, just say what you mean, verbally, but do it in an effective way, building sort of a framework of effective communications across everybody. So that was, sort of what I remember. Just, it's been a long time. I'm sure there's a heck of a lot more to it than that, but that's just sort of the top level that I took away from that. So communications, getting in with groups of people. Like I said, if you can, I recommend everybody now, just even if it's just a fun exercise, find people in different areas, like, of your life, just people you might see them out to dinner, or, you work with, or whatever. Just, entertain the idea of getting together, sort of a preparedness group, a survival group. Because, again, the whole topic of this is on everybody's mind at some level, depending on who they are. And I think even if it's just sort of a fun exercise, it's valuable. Doing that is still valuable, because if you sort of do, set up a framework where, you tell everybody, like in the first meeting, like, if anything goes down, we're all going to meet here at this location. So we all live nearby. If it, even if you have to walk, or if it's an EMP or a coronal mass ejection, or the roads are screwed up, and if you can get to this location, bring everything you can, and we'll do what we can do. Bring your guns, bring your food, bring your radios, bring whatever you can bring that's going to contribute to the overall success and sustainability of the group going forward. So, and I've just probably over the last, it's probably been about a decade now. I've talked with numerous people that I'm still in contact with, and I said near the end of my survival video the other day that I posted, I probably have at least three and a half, maybe four, what I call rally points around my area, people that I know, and some of them aren't connected with the others. But depending on where I am when something happens, I have a place to go. And all of them are pretty well set up. They're farmers or large landowners, people that I've gone out and shot firearms with, or just drank beer with, or had cookouts or bonfires or whatever. I mean, but over the years, this topic always came up somewhat, just through all the different administrations and societal issues and everything. This topic always sort of arose with those people and me. So we always just said, yeah, we'll rally here. And they're going to rally there anyway because it's their property. But each one of these people I'm talking about, and I have, like I said the other day, I have one on the sort of the north side of town, the south side, east and west, just depending on where I'm at. And then hoping that they've listened to what I've said about communications. And there's a sort of a communications person in each one of these communities. But if we can, and no matter where I go, whether it's, north, south, or east, west, if there's communications people like me in all these different communities, then we can communicate among all four of them. And even if it's sort of a long distance, depending on the situation, to get between those places, we can still communicate and then make a plan to rally and create even a bigger group, or pull in other groups that that we don't know about, that have developed around our county or our region. So, I mean, probably the best pop culture book that I have read on sort of this topic, and it covers a lot of this, is let me see, is it 1 Second After, I think it's called? 1 Second After. Yeah, it's 1 Second After by William Forsctchen. I guess somebody copied his audiobook up here, or part of it, part one, post Doomsday. I'm not much of an audiobook fan, but I guess it's up here now. It's probably sort of pirated. Yeah, I do not own the rights to this audio for your enjoyment only, but that's sort of low. I'd rather, what's that, a trailer? 1 Second After, official trailer. I don't think that's connected to the actual book or movie. I don't think this is connected. It might be, somewhat. Or just, it's probably a trailer that a fan of the book made on their own, just using clip art and general footage. Let me play it here. Hold on. Let's see here. Actually, let me switch my screen over. Sorry about that. Actually, let me back up because, I wasn't on this screen here. But it's a book called 1 Second After by William Forsctchen. He's, really good book. It's 3 parts. It's like 1 second after, then I think it's like 28 days after, and then like 2 years after, like a major event. And if I remember correctly in the book, it was an EMP event, like they believe it was North Korea, but then I'm not gonna spoil it, but it ended up not being North Korea. It ended up being domestic entities. So that's all I'll say. So the third book sort of, I think, gets into that final part of it, and it's from my government background and my experience with like exercises, not only on the government side but on the ham radio side. It's probably a very realistic representation of how life would be after a situation. The book it takes place in North Carolina. I think it's around Asheville. There's a Black Mountain. It's like a mountain up there, so it's sort of in that general area. But he's sort of like a former government guy, and the power goes out, and his wife had died like years before. He's like taking care of his 2 daughters. I think he's like a lecturer or professor at a local university in like Asheville or somewhere, like I said, in North Carolina, sort of like North Carolina, West Virginia border or something like that. So the whole story sort of follows him and sort of what him and his family goes through right after the outage for like the first month. And I think the first book goes up to like a couple months after the incident, but then it moves on to the second and the third books. But it's just very raw. I mean, it's ruthlessly raw. And sort of as I got into in previous videos, I mean, when it comes to survival, I mean, the people who are going to have it the worst are the people who are on medicines, who are on prescriptions, who are in nursing homes, hospitals. Like where I am, there's a place called Oakwood where, people with mental issues and disabilities live, and people who can't take care of themselves. Those are the people who are going to, go through the most raw situation possible. Then again, people who just aren't prepared. Probably, I wouldn't say 90 or plus percent anymore. I'm thinking that percentage is dropping, but I think on a day-to-day basis, probably 75% of people are completely oblivious to the possibilities of what could happen. They just live a life of mediocrity. They go about their day-to-day. They might see programs, or they might run across videos like the ones that I, play and everything here. They might run across all these things, but not even, and even though it might scare them at the moment, it doesn't process. It doesn't become a part of their life, a part of their plan. And it probably should at some level, even if it's just going out and building up a little bit of a food supply. Basic, like personal safety and personal security. It doesn't have to be a gun. I mean, it can be a machete or a baseball bat or whatever. A little bit of a communications, even if it doesn't have to be like a complicated, ham radio or, FRS or GMRS radio like the ones I've shown here. It doesn't have to be, one of these complicated, big ones. Which this one costs about $100, but most people aren't going to spend that much money for, a radio that they may never have to use. I mean, I got one other friend to buy this, and that was about it. Even though there were a couple other people around when I was talking about that topic, there was one other girl that I'm friends with who actually bought that same one, and I programmed it with all the same frequencies that I have. So if something happens, we have sort of like a frequency to rally on. I told her, like, be on this channel, and we'll find each other, if we're not nearby, or if, if one of us are out of town and we come back to the area, or, whatever the situation. But, even if it's just, going out and, like I said, getting the food stores, basic personal security, and getting like a couple of these little radios with a big old pack of batteries, to power it. Even a radio like this, most people are going to be on those type of radios, the FRS, GMRS. So you'll be able to hear a lot of information. You'll be able to, even if you're not talking to them, you can receive and listen to a lot of the information and figure out what you need to do and what the situation, what's happening. You'll be able to basically get a situation report, sit rep, on what's going on in a disaster. And then if you want to go a couple steps further, you can get like a shortwave radio, or a radio like the orange one I talked about, that has like wider bands. You can, outside of the normal frequencies that I have to talk to ham radio or talk to my friend, you can also just scan the frequencies. It has a very wide frequency range. And not only can you receive those, but if you needed to, you could even transmit on those out of band or those out of service frequencies, the first responders, the federal. And if they can hear you, if you're within range, they'll, you'll be able to reach them and ask for help if needed. So very valuable. Because most likely if it's a big event, the cellular system's not going to stay up very long. I mean, most of the towers have a couple days of backup, and if the power's out longer than that, you might have a handful that might have like some kind of solar power or something along those lines, but you can't depend on the cell system. I would highly recommend, honestly, especially if it's a regional thing, and if you can afford it, I would highly recommend people start to get Starlink satellite internet. Even if you don't maintain like an active subscription, most likely if something large happened and Elon Musk still had control of his satellites, the Starlink satellites, if something big happened, he would probably open them up. Even if you, like I said, even if you didn't have an active subscription, if you had like the equipment to be able to connect to it, it would most likely be opened up to where you didn't need an account. You could just like put your Starlink out, turn it on, and you have internet and communications. So if you had a cell phone, you can still text and send, do, voice over Wi-Fi or FaceTime or any other app like Signal, Telegram, etc. So that's getting a little more into the harder core prepper because, Starlink's not cheap. It's like $500-600. Just to buy the equipment, and then if you do want to maintain an active subscription, it's anywhere from like $109 to like $139, depending on if it's a fixed or an RV mobile plan. But that's an option too, and especially again if it's only like a regional thing, and cellular and radio, and none of that's effective if you have satellite. You can't really knock that down. Well, I mean, it would have to be like a major world war thing where the Russians and Chinese are, shooting down Starlink satellites for that to become ineffective. So Starlink's good. They've used it in the Ukraine. I mean, from the reports that I've seen out of the Ukraine using Starlink, it's been very, very effective in helping them coordinate movements and communicating from front lines and so on. So. Yeah, getting bitten into the weeds now, so I'm probably going to jump out of this, rewatch it, and maybe edit it a little bit, and maybe see where it goes. But like I said, that's a good book, and that's sort of a takeaway from this when it comes to different things. Because like actually the guy's sort of getting back into the book, the guy's I think youngest daughter in the book had type 1 diabetes, where she needed her insulin, and a big part of the struggle for him was finding that insulin and being able to preserve it because it has to be stored at a certain temperature. And without electric, you didn't have refrigeration, so he was like trying to put it in his like bathroom, his basement bathroom, like in the toilet tank where the water's colder. But I guess I'll go ahead and spoil it. But I think at the end of the first book, his daughter died. He couldn't get the insulin she needed, and there was no other way. So that sort of sad. But and actually, that's a good interview with him. I haven't watched that in years. So maybe if I remember, I'll maybe link that down in the description of him talking about the book. Let me maybe play a minute.
Well, good evening, and let me look at my notes. Okay. I can start and close anything with Abraham Lincoln, and I prefer to do that. And one of my favorite quotes from Abraham Lincoln is that the dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present, and the occasion is piled high with difficulty. We must rise to the occasion. And America must rise to the occasion for the year 2012.
Nice T-shirt, Tea Party.
Coming home yesterday and listening to the news with the president talking about stepping up and the fair share and Warren Buffett's secretary. How many of you are familiar with the play Sweeney Todd? Maybe that analogy, how many do not know what I'm talking about? I've never seen, okay. Well, okay, then I'll use the other analogy. To me, this is the equivalent of, we're in a medieval village and they got some guy chained to the post and they're flogging him. And then they turn around and say, well, it's only fair that we flog you and you too. Come on up here. It's America. At the end of the year, you would have totally destroyed the country and you'd still have a deficit. Even NPR last night was talking, I was shocked. I mean, I listen to NPR, I like the music and everything. Even NPR pointed out that if they confiscated 50% of all the earnings of every supposed millionaire in America, that would only be 10% of the deficit for this year. We are in the middle of class warfare. But let's talk about that a bit later.
And what this was 9 years ago, this interview. And, I've gotten into politics in the past. I try not to get into it nearly as much anymore because, it's my opinion and I don't want to, force my opinion. But when I do have an opinion, I don't mind speaking it as long as people aren't going to condemn me or whatever. But, this was 9 years ago. This was back during the Obama administration, before Trump came in, before the Biden, before the COVID, before, the rescue plans and the PPP and the multi-trillion-dollar bills were passed to bail out not only, people, but businesses and other entities. The infrastructure plans, you got the Inflation Reduction Act, which is a joke. They're sitting there celebrating in D.C. the other day the Inflation Reduction Act while the stock market's crashing like 1,200 points. The act that's supposed to help while the market's crashing. So, yeah, wow. So this guy, I don't know much about him personally, but it sounds like he probably knows what he's talking about. Like I've talked about, he's written a pretty good book to put those views into a fictional format that probably has a heck of a lot of seeds of truth within it to help people see all the different possible scenarios across the board. Like I said, whether it's a child that needs medication, a grandparent which I think it was even in the book, it was the main character's mother-in-law who was in that nursing home where, when everything hit, when the EMP happened and everything, all the nurses and doctors fled. They just left. And all these old people are literally rotting in their rooms. They had, crapped themselves and pissed themselves and and the necrosis had started setting in, and they were, it was just the people who were able to get up and move were like, killing people, and I mean, it was just absolutely like horrible. And then later in that book, after that, like months down the road, or weeks or whatever down the road, they ran into a cult, like a fundamentalist, cult type group that formed, and they were cannibals. So anybody that came through their territory, like in that part of North Carolina or West Virginia or wherever it was in the book, they would just capture you and just like eat you. They would take you down into their lair or their cave. I mean, it sounds so fantastical. It sounds like a movie, like a book, but how he describes it, and everything. But then in the book, there was a glimmer of hope, like the small town that he lived in, the mayor and the politicians brought in the main, not this guy, on the screen, but brought in the main character in the book to help their community, like rebuild and to start building some infrastructure back and get some modicum of control, and then to actually sort of become like an ambassador to the next town over. Let's find a vehicle that still, in their case, it was an EMP, so none of the modern vehicles worked. So they had to, but this guy, again, not this guy, but the guy in the book had a old vehicle, like from the 50s, that didn't have any electronics. So he was able to drive his vehicle over to the next town and sort of be, like I said, become an ambassador between the towns. But like that other town was like, very defensive and sort of stuck in their ways. I think they eventually got something worked out. Read the book, get the books, get all of them, buy all 3 of them. Before I close it out here, so 1 second after is the first book. Let me put in trilogy. Actually, let me go back to Google. So trilogy, and there's probably a bunch of them out there. So you got 1 second after on Amazon. Okay, after book series complete set. It's only like $21. William Forsctchen. You got 1 second after, 1 year later, and then 1 second after, 1 year later, and then the final day. So they're all really good. They all cover different levels of it. 1 second after, like I've talked about this whole video, being sort of the more local response. Everything I've talked about. And then if it went to 1 year later, where society starts to rebuild a bit, when towns are coming together, when there's a little bit of society rebuilding, and then the final day, like I said, was more of a wide thing, where like military was getting involved, former government contractors, Mount Weather, places like that, where that part became more apparent, and those people, when basically as things really started to become more cohesive, not necessarily good, the situations were still quite bad, but when things became a little more cohesive and they were able to travel further afield outside their communities, and they had to fight for their communities. So excellent books. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it at that. Like I said, I've changed my channel name from my personal name over to sort of a cool little DC entropy meaning chaos in my mind, because my chaos randomness, because that's sort of where these podcasts typically go. So let me switch back to that. Let me put my theme music back on. I hope hope everybody has a good night and hope you enjoyed this little talk. About 45 minutes, 45 and a half. So good night. Peace out.